Okay, so welcome to this Wikileaks Press conference. Joining me today is Julian Assange, founder and editor-in-chief of Wikileaks. Good day to you, Julian.
Good day, James. My name is Julian Assange. I'm the founder and editor of Wikileaks. There's been quite a lot of press reportage, as you're all aware, following our US election publications and the collapse of the Hillary Clinton campaign in that election, and the variety of US intelligence comments put out anonymously through the press, and finally some formal statements culminating in the combined FBI, NSA, CIA report, which was put out on Friday in an unclassified version. First of all, let's background a little bit about WikiLeaks itself. I founded WikiLeaks 10 years ago. WikiLeaks specializes in obtaining and publishing and analyzing documents of historical, political, or ethical significance, preserving them before the public. We also fight to be able to continue on in our work by promoting freedom of the press more generally and the rights of whistleblowers and sources. WikiLeaks is entirely funded by our readers and publication sales, and that has been the case for over 10 years, apart from the initial funding, which came from myself personally. So first of all, some general comments. We'll get on to questions very quickly, because I know that there's many reporters and members of the public who are deeply interested in this issue. I have read literally thousands of intelligence reports. WikiLeaks specializes in publishing a wide range of information, but that includes diplomatic and intelligence reports. The report, which was released on Friday, the principal author is the CIA, whose current head is John Brennan, is not an intelligence report. It does not have the structure of an intelligence report. It does not have the structure of a presidential daily brief. It is, frankly, quite embarrassing, I think, to the reputation of the US intelligence services to be putting out something that claims to be a report like that. This is a press release. It is clearly designed for political effect, and US intelligence services have been politicized by the Obama administration in the production of this report and a number of other statements. Now, that's unfortunately not surprising. We've seen that in the past many times, from the Gulf of Tonkin to the outrageous high confidence combined intelligence report, which stated falsely that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and that was the need to go to war with Iraq. So I want to go through, just very briefly, some of the unusual aspects of this report. So first of all, there's only about 5 pages of analysis out of the some over 20 pages in the report. The perhaps bulk of the words is a 2012 open source center analysis on RT, which has been appended. Now, the Open Source Center was shut down. In my view, a mistake. But the Open Source Center, it was a part of the CIA that simply read the news. That means, and what people are saying on Twitter, open sources, not obtained from any secret information, and produced reports from that. So that is apparently designed to pad out the report. Now, if we look at the what I think is the clearest politicization of the report, it is those parts which reference Russian state intentions in relation to Donald Trump. No evidence of anything is presented anywhere in the report, but to me it seems that the critical question here is whether the allegation is that Russian intelligence services themselves, or people under their direction, hacked the Democratic National Party and John Podesta with the intent of favouring Donald Trump. Now, even if you accept that Russian intelligence services hacked Democratic Party institutions in the United States, and it is normal for the major intelligence services to hack each other's political parties, major political parties on a constant basis to gain intelligence. That includes France, Russia, Israel, China, and especially the United States. So even if you accepted that Russian hackers were in there, and no evidence is provided itself in the report, then you have to ask the question, what was the intent of those Russian hacks, and do they connect to our publications, or is it simply incidental? Now, as we have already stated, WikiLeaks sources in relation to the John Podesta emails and the DNC leak are not members of any government. They are not state parties. They do not come from the Russian government. But let's look at the chronology. So the Podesta emails that we released, the ones that we released during the election, are dated up to March of this year. The US intelligence services and the consultants for the DNC say that Russian intelligence services started hacking the Democratic, the DNC in 2015. Now, Trump is clearly not on the horizon in any substantial manner. In 2015, he hadn't even nominated for the primary. By the time of March 2016, Donald Trump is not viewed to be a potential serious contender in the 2016 US presidential election. In fact, everyone viewed, including WikiLeaks, that he would very likely lose. So when you look at the CIA report, you'll notice that it deliberately obscures its assessments as to intentions and timeframes. And that is a key question, and the failure to come out openly about what has happened with the time frame shows you the politicization of this report. Further in the report, the CIA states that it is, rather the combined report states that it cannot, it doesn't know when the DNC was hacked. James Clapper, the head of the DNI, who is in theory in charge of all 16 US intelligence agencies, the DNI itself being the 17th, has previously stated that the DNI, the US intelligence community, is not aware of when WikiLeaks obtained its material or when the sequencing of our material was done, or how we obtained our material directly. So there seems to be a great fog in the connection to WikiLeaks. So let's look at some of the conflation going on. First, there was a clear political attempt in the US press to conflate our publications and alleged hacks of the DNC with attacks on the US voting system. And that led to 53% of Democrats, according to polling, believing that the Russians had actually hacked the vote itself, the voting machines, or the vote counting system, and in that manner elected Donald Trump. Then there was another conflation, which is the publications in other media, such as The Hill, Politico, and on sites such as DC Leaks, with WikiLeaks publications. WikiLeaks publications are a separate story, entirely different material published by us, emails, and even in this report by the NSA, CIA, and FBI, making a finding, no surprise to us, that they were not able to determine any forgeries in WikiLeaks publications. So our record for accuracy over the last 10 years of perfect accuracy in our publications is preserved. In this case, the Podesta and DNC emails are authenticated not just by us, not just by a cryptographic system which we use called DKIM, but now also by the CIA, FBI, NSA, and ODNI. And so one might reflect back to when the election was on, and also slightly afterwards, when Donna Brazil, now the chair of the DNC, falsely stated that our publications were fake, which exposed her corruptly feeding debate questions to Hillary Clinton. It shows that the vice presidential candidate for Hillary Clinton himself lied when he said that WikiLeaks publications about him were falsified. They were not. And similarly for another number of other Democratic Party officials and strategists and spokespeople, those people were lying to the public when they said that there were any forgeries in our publications. And now I think we might go to the first question.
Okay, so the first question today for you is from Shafat Mosvi, who asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how fabricated is the CIA report on the US elections?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I would say that most of this so-called intelligence report is not even fabricated. That is, it doesn't even make assertions, for the most part, that rise to the level of fabrications, because they're not evidence, or it uses speculative terms and admits its own speculation. And it engages in sneaky conflations. For example, there's reportage in the New York Times from US officials saying that they say that our materials came from a hacking group, not a state, but a hacking group, then saying that this hacking group was somehow endorsed in some manner by the Russian intelligence services. But you see words in this CIA report like relayed, or approving of relaying, creating quite a vague description of what may have happened with our publications. Now, if you want to ask this question, how good a report is it as an intelligence report out of 1 to 10, or how much evidentiary weight does it have? The evidentiary weight is literally zero. There is no evidence of any kind supplied. The closest thing that comes to that is open source reporting that some official in Russia speaking on TV said that they were happy that Hillary Clinton lost. But I mean, anyone can do that.
Okay. Once again, you can submit your questions by hashtag @AskWL. We're moving on to our next question, which is from AJ Vincents, who's an online contributor to 5280 magazine, who asks, your whole premise has been that you don't know sources and therefore can't endanger them. But now you say that you don't know your source. How would you respond to that?
We haven't said whether we know or don't know our sources. We have made one statement, which is that our sources in the US election-related matter are not a state party. Wikileaks speaks about its sources, obviously, with incredible care. We have a perfect record in never having done anything to divulge our sources. And that's a record we want to keep. That's why sources across the world, including within the US government, trust WikiLeaks to protect them. Now, we have at various times where we felt it was safe to do so. Said that a source is, say, a military whistleblower, or that they have one property or another, but we are generally reluctant to get into any kind of discussion. This is the same policy that US intelligence takes with its sources, generally refusing to confirm or deny any property about its sources. But we think that in this case it does not sufficiently threaten our sources to make this very bland disclosure. Okay,
Carol from CNN has submitted a question. Is WikiLeaks sure that the go-between didn't get the material from the Russian government, or a private cyber hacking group acting on orders by the Russian government or entities?
Well, we can't play 20 questions with our sources, gradually narrowing down the ambit of who they are, when they are, what country they were in, etc. For the obvious reasons. Each piece of information you disclose about a source narrows the scope of any investigation.
Okay. Again, you can submit questions by hashtag AskWL. Julian, there's been a lot of questions coming in.
I just have to say that that if it was the case, we're concerned about protecting our sources. Now, there's obviously, if our sources were, for example, a state, we would have a lot less concern in attempting to protect them.
Okay. So moving on, Julian, there's a lot of questions coming in regarding proof of life. These are questions that keep coming up, and I think now would be a good time for you to respond to this issue.
Well, I'm going to give a talk on Reddit tomorrow, where I'll deal with such questions. Just in brief, it has been quite a difficult time from the US election onwards. There's been, since slightly before the US election onwards, there has been a lot of pressure of different kinds, which we said was occurring. And as some of you are aware, the internet here in the embassy where I have political asylum was cut off in relation to that pressure. Ecuador and John Kerry deny that, but our sources say that is the case. But I'll speak about that tomorrow on Reddit.
Okay, question now from PistCU. What is the most important thing we can do before Obama leaves office?
Well, this is absolutely critical. Past administrations of both the Democrat and Republican flavors have engaged in mass destruction of records as they left office. We are told that destruction of records is occurring now in different parts of the Obama administration, in different departments or agencies. That's what happens when an administration leads office. Our philosophy is that such information is a part of history. It belongs legally and philosophically to the American people, and more broadly, insofar as the United States interacts with the world, it belongs to people of the world. It is part of human history, and the destruction of major archives of human history, frankly, should be formally listed as a crime against humanity, because those archives belong to humanity. They're what we use to understand the world around us, to discover new political theories and observations, to build our institutions, etc. They are part of the history of humankind, and to destroy them is an absolutely egregious act. One understands the political motivation for it, but to eliminate small political risks by destroying major elements of history is frankly an obscenity, and so we have put out a reward for $30,000 for information leading to the arrest or exposure of anyone engaged in such destruction of historical records. Our request to system administrators in the Obama administration, and this goes for other administrations around the world as well, is take the data now. Just take it now, keep it under your bed or with your mother, and then you can give that to Wikileaks or other journalists at your leisure. Get hold of that history and protect it, because that is something that belongs to humanity and does not belong to a political party.
Okay, moving on then, we have a question submitted by Andrew __ Gamali. Julian, how are you doing? How is your health? How much longer do you think you will be able to survive in the embassy?
Well, it's a difficult physical environment, obviously, to be detained for 6 years illegally without charge, even though there have been 2 UN formal findings this year that is illegal and must stop. Continues on. On the other hand, I am very committed to this work that I'm doing, so it gives me great energy to continue, and I'm sure that's true for all the rest of the WikiLeaks team.
Okay. Benem94 asks, what would you say to people who see WikiLeaks' recent activity as an open endorsement of Trump?
Look, before the US election, intentionally before November 8th, I put out an editorial on behalf of WikiLeaks and explaining exactly why we were doing what we were doing. So before one candidate or another won. Now, let's look at this from the position of WikiLeaks. We thought, just like everyone, based on the opinion polling, that Hillary Clinton was almost certain to win. In the end, it was this, apart from her qualities as a candidate, it was this opinion polling that was her undoing, because the presentation was that she was guaranteed to win, and as a result, cashed up funders only gave $1.2 billion formally to her campaign. If they had thought that it was lion ball, that it was 50-50 odds of who was going to win, then they probably would have ponied up another $5 billion to make sure that she won. Now, let's look at this from the position of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks specializes in opening government records and those of major corporations. Hillary Clinton's been in government, the Obama administration's been in government. We published Hillary Clinton's cables, her emails. We've indexed a great deal of content and stitched it together so people can explore it to understand how this major power structure of the US government works and the various establishments that revolve around it. So as a result, we became domain experts on the State Department. We published more than 3 million State Department cables, and to a degree, Hillary Clinton itself. So we are trusted by people who understand the value of such materials to bring them to us, and we have strongly encouraged expanding our collection of materials that relate to the State Department and its personalities. Now, if we look at what was in WikiLeaks' interests in terms of an institution trying to deal with an array of threats against it, or what was in my personal interest as editor, we were creating, and we knew, creating substantial conflict between us and the person we expected to be the next president. So we understood that we were putting ourselves in a more persecuted condition by relentlessly exposing this material, increasing the risk for us, not decreasing them at all. But in relation to Trump, just speaking as an analyst, well, it's an interesting situation. He's the U.S. population turned against the elites, for want of a better word, in the United States. When the elites don't listen to the population stops listening to elites. And as they pushed against Donald Trump so aggressively, which was principally heard through media elites, but also others coming into the play, I think that the population saw that, well, their social conflict is with these elites, and what the elites really don't like is this guy Donald Trump. So they ended up voting for Trump as a way of delivering into DC something that the existing media and DC establishment was appalled by. So rather than necessarily a collaborative endeavor, it was to push down those existing walls. And what happens with President-elect Trump going forward is quite unclear. There's a lot of very poor cabinet appointments. There's a couple of interesting ones, but it certainly loosened up the political situation in DC, possibly in a very bad way, and in areas possibly in a good way.
Okay. Jake Hicks asks, do you think the intelligence report released by the CIA undermines the leak, or is this just growing pains of a major leak like this?
We like attention to our materials. So from our perspective, we have, as a publisher, we're absolutely thrilled with this report because it has the FBI, NSA, CIA, and ODNI all coming into our camp, mutually endorsing what we've said all along, that, of course, with a Wikileaks publication, you can rely on the fact that we have verified it in many different ways, and that it's accurate. So we think it substantially adds weight to it. Now, as to what the motivations are by the Obama administration to produce such poor intelligence reports that are angled at saying that Vladimir Putin supported Donald Trump, if you like, that he's Putin's candidate, well, I think the politics of the situation is pretty clear. It's two factors. Number one, the reformation that should be happening right now in the Democratic Party structures, which normally does happen after an election, which is, well, hang on, this team lost the election. The structure lost the election. Why did it lose the election? Well, it's pretty obvious and was exposed by our materials. As a result of effectively rigging the primary, the Democratic Party didn't end up with the most competitive candidate. That's the whole purpose of a primary, is to select the most competitive candidate to go into battle with the other candidate. On the Republican side, there were 17 candidates. On the Democratic side, there were 3. Already, there had been a fixing of the entry structure within the Democratic Party that led to there only being 3 candidates in the first place. And then the campaign within the DNC to marginalise Bernie Sanders, including by engaging in black PR, formal instructions through the chain of command that we have published in our materials. So the Democratic Party ruling class are fighting like dogs to prevent the Democratic Party base kicking them all out. That's what normally would happen as a result of such an epic disaster. Secondarily, in order to undermine the legitimacy of the Donald Trump administration, which I can imagine the Democrats are going to try and shackle this to Donald Trump for a long time, saying that he is an illegitimate president, probably over the next 4 years. I mean, you can see that already in the election campaign itself, with the placing of the DNC servers next to the Watergate filing cabinet to somehow conflate our publications and Watergate. Look, even if you believed that hackers of some kind illicitly obtained the Podesta emails and the DNC emails that we published, even if you believed that, what are we talking about in terms of impact? Well, yes, WikiLeaks was the most discussed political topic throughout October and early November on Facebook and on Twitter, according to statistics coming out of those 2 companies. But what was discussed is the words of Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, and her team revealing unethical practices, corruption, hypocrisy, etc. So should the American people have been denied that true information? If that true information had an effect, it was because they read what what Hillary Clinton's own words were and the words of her team, and they didn't like what they saw.
Okay, now a question from Brian T. Simmons, who asks, Julian, is there a future for the FOIA in the present fake news attack on freedom of the press and speech?
The Freedom of Information Act?
Yes.
Well, the Freedom of Information Act is a formalized leak system coming into play in the United States in the early 70s, in Australia by 75, not in the UK, interestingly, until about 7 years ago. It's a very important device. Unfortunately, the reality is that the Freedom of Information Act is managed by government departments at the first instance. If you manage to get together enough money and time, then by courts at the second instance. And government departments work out ways of deviating the Freedom of Information Act over time. For example, in the United States, there has been a grand jury DOJ investigation against Wikileaks, extremely serious, said to be of unprecedented scale and nature by the US government itself since early 2010. Now, there is a Hoover Dam of documents associated with that ongoing attempts to prosecute me and Wikileaks that dozens of journalists have asked for. And that whole dam is being kept back under the basis that there is a claimed pending prosecution. Now, if ever that is dropped, I have no doubt that the FBI and DOJ will switch to another claim. For example, law enforcement methods, confidential informants, etc.
Okay, and Paul Sorrentino asks, are you surprised with the outcome of the election, and is it what you hoped for?
Well, we didn't really hope for any particular manner. We can see on the one hand Hillary Clinton represented a consolidation of power in the existing ruling class of the United States, consolidation of the international, what are better words, neoliberal regime, an increase in conformism, creating a space which is harder for whistleblowers and publications like Wikileaks to operate in. On the other hand, Donald Trump and some of the people around him very hostile towards Wikileaks, making suggestions, for example, that Edward Snowden should be executed. So, we have, in the case of Donald Trump, a destabilizing, in the positive and the negative sense, force, which can throw up certain things, either very good or very bad. And in the case of Hillary Clinton, a consolidation of the existing regime. And that regime, under Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, attempted to prosecute or prosecuted more journalistic sources and journalists under the Espionage Act than all previous presidencies combined. In fact, more than 3 times as many.
Okay. And at Jazz Pineapple asks, how comes you guys don't tweet on international leaks anymore? It's become incredibly US-centric.
No, it's more that the US press reports about the United States, and the European press also is interested in reporting about the United States. The United States, let's be frank here, is an empire with more than 700 military bases around the world, and as the world's second largest or largest economy, depending on how you measure it, is very interconnected. Hollywood films are the dominant cultural product, more than any other single cultural product. So people interested in the United States globally, and especially in the United States. But within the United States and globally, people not so interested. For example, in our fantastic German leaks, which we released 60,000 pages about the German intelligence agency, the BND, just a few weeks ago, or our material on the Turkish energy minister, very widely reported in Turkey. In fact, arrest warrants were issued for 9 Turkish journalists, 5 of them imprisoned for reporting on that material, as well as attempted attacks against Red Hack, the alleged Marxist hacker group that is claimed to be the source for us of that material.
Okay then. Liberal Love One asks, why don't you explain why it would be hard for Russia to hack the votes, explain the security, and how easy it would be to track them?
Can you repeat that? There's quite a lot of components.
Yes, 3 components. Liberal Love One asks, why don't you explain why it would be hard for Russia to hack the votes, explain the security, and how easy it would be to track them?
Okay, so there was quite a bit of false information published by the media during the election that suggesting or even claiming that the Russian state had hacked US vote counting systems. It's admitted, even in this report from Friday, by the 4 combined intelligence agencies, that such hacking on the vote counting infrastructure did not occur, and it's quite hard for that to occur in a system like the United States, where there's 52 states and they have many different procedures. But I will say that you can look at the work of, say, Alex Haldeman, who he can engage in a bit of publicity attempts later on, but he's done serious work elsewhere. So has Rob Gongrip on the security of voting machines. And voting machines are not secure. In my view, in something like an election, in a competitive adversarial environment, one should not trust claims of security. So a voting machine company might say that they have secure voting machines, and experts at one time might examine those voting machines and agree. But how do you know what has happened over time? You need something that's quite simple and transparent, that the average person can see how ballots are being counted. Now, there can be mechanisms that are acceptable to have a combined system where you have hand-counted ballots and voting machines. Hand-counted ballots tend to stop systematic vote fraud, and voting machines tend to stop localized vote fraud.
Okay. A random account asks, why is there more focus on those who exposed the deception and corruption of the DNC and Hillary Clinton instead of on the offenders?
Well, there was some focus, there was some focus by, say, Fox and those who were supported Republicans during the election on what we exposed, although principally the good work was done by citizen journalists and people at Reddit, and then picked up by broader media. But it's now we're into a different phase. In this phase, there's a desire by those affiliated with the Clinton failure to try and do everything possible to distract from their culpability. You can see that, for example, in articles which reference try and claim that Bernie Sanders would have lost against Donald Trump as well.
Okay. And Blueberry Center asks, is there any truth to the rumor that WikiLeaks had access to RNC data and chose not to leak?
No, that's false.
Absolutely false. Okay. Okay, so moving on here, just a reminder to all our listeners that you can submit questions by using the hashtag @AskWL. We are having a press conference here with Julian Assange, the founder and editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. AJ Vincent, who we had a question for before, has come back. Wants another question. What do you think about people in the US who once called for severe punishments for you, even the death penalty?
So the question is on the Trump cabinet picks, I assume, some of which have called for the death penalty for Chelsea Manning, some potentially in relation to, I'm not sure any of the cabinet picks have called for my death penalty, but they've certainly made in the past menacing statements towards WikiLeaks. Well, one can look at this as an interesting phenomenon. Of course, it was wrong for Republicans to have made those comments at the time that they did. They were misled to a degree by the Obama administration and the press, which falsely stated that WikiLeaks publications had led to the deaths of US soldiers. And the Pentagon had to come out under oath in the Chelsea Manning trial in 2013 and admit that in fact that was false, that they could not find a single person who'd been physically harmed in response to our publications. I'm more interested in looking at, if you look at this example of Sarah Palin, extremely interesting example. Now, we published Sarah Palin's emails in 2008. She had been or was at the time governor of Alaska, and she had two email accounts. One email account was a personal account that had been used in part for some official government work, and so therefore had taken her email box off the radar of the Freedom of Information Act. And Freedom of Information Act is something that WikiLeaks has tried very hard to defend, and so we thought this was an important thing to publish in that context. She has come out quite bravely, I think, given the circumstances, and apologized for her statement saying that I should be hunted down like the Taliban, and suggested that people watch the Edward Snowden film. Now, I find that transition extremely interesting. So, on the one hand, you go, well, okay, look, these Republicans, they were being opportunists at the time, back in 2010, when they made these comments, and they're being, the allegation could be that they're being opportunists now in making positive comments. I accept that a lot of that is probably happening. But it's not the only thing that's happening. The view, according to opinion polling of the CIA amongst Republicans, has gone down to 3% approval rating, and amongst Democrats, 31%. This represents something of the changing view in the Republican Party, or rather perhaps the Republicans, about the nature of US intelligence agencies and the nature of war. Now, of course, after they're in government for a little while, they'll probably get back into the feeling that they're running the system now and that the CIA is their intelligence agency. But at the moment, there's a chance for a reform of those structures in the incoming Trump administration.
Okay, and Deplorable Elsa asks, why do you think the US media is receiving intel before President-elect Trump is?
So this is referring to the staging of the CIA report. Very interesting. We followed it closely because it mentions us directly. The staging was this. On Thursday, the report was ready, the classified version at least was ready, and was meant to have been given to Barack Obama. Donald Trump was then scheduled to receive a copy or a briefing about that report on Friday afternoon. So everyone knows that you use Friday afternoons if you want to vary publicity. So Donald Trump's ability to respond to the contents of that report were scheduled through scheduling, Donald Trump, by having his reading of the report scheduled for Friday afternoon, was marginalized in his ability to respond to any of the contents. Similarly, WikiLeaks' ability to respond to the comments was marginalized through that scheduling. Now, what's the problem? The problem for the administration is that that report is a political attack cannon against Donald Trump, and also to defend the reason why the Democratic Party lost. So if you put it out on a Friday afternoon yourself, how are you going to have the impact that you want? Okay, so instead they planted it on Thursday with the Washington Post and NBC, including some of the classified parts of that report communicated by officials to the Washington Post, which were more inflammatory and which can't be checked because they're not in the version that was released to the public. So that was the media play that was engaged in. And there's been some press saying, oh, look, this is ridiculous that WikiLeaks doesn't like leaks. No, WikiLeaks loves leaks, of course. This wasn't a leak. This was an authorized plant by the executive. Authorized by the executive, but very likely illegal under congressional law, because it's a violation of the distribution of classified information. It's possible that secretly the Obama administration declassified those parts, but that is something that intelligence agency staff would not support. For example, the claimed intercepts of Russian officials celebrating Hillary Clinton's loss. Now, that is what is referred to in US classifications as comment information, communications intelligence information, sometimes also referred to as SIGINT information. That has extra protection under US law, and the report itself was top secret. So there's a planting of information from a top secret comment report with the Washington Post and NBC on the Thursday, in order to make sure there was only one voice one voice before the public, and that voice was not that of the president-elect, and it was not that of WikiLeaks or the other affected parties, like Shevchenko, the young woman who's alleged to be the Russian hacker in the Treasury report released on the Treasury sanctions list released on the 29th. Very interestingly, Shevchenko is not in the CIA's report released on Friday. Why is that interesting? Well, because Shevchenko is on the US sanctions list issued by the Treasury on the 29th, so her name is absolutely public. There cannot be any protection of sources and methods to not name her in the report that was released. Now, Shevchenko has given an interview, and it seems that actually she's not the sort of person that is likely to be a source of such information. I suggest journalists look into that story. Actually, she's an extremely interesting woman, and her story doesn't really match up with the accusations that are against her. But why wasn't her name mentioned in that CIA report? It's one of many facts that could have been mentioned which don't break sources or methods, and yet were not. Well, because this report is not really about naming facts that can be checked. It's about producing something that is not falsifiable, and therefore which is intellectually bankrupt.
Okay. And Curry Dobson says, the Russian smearing has little to do with WikiLeaks and more to do with delegitimizing the incoming Trump administration. Does this sound correct?
I mean, that's the... As I said, there's two political impetuses for this report. We assess based upon looking at the different players and how they're acting. And that is, number one, defending the position of the people in key power positions in the DNC who will pick Democratic Party candidates going into the 2018 election for Congress and eventually the presidency, and whose income or power derives from clinging on to those positions. And number two, as a means to delegitimize the election of Donald Trump.
Okay. And Daniel Kazemi asks, do you believe whistleblowers will be safer in the upcoming administration, or will they continue to be persecuted?
I believe they'll be continue to be persecuted. I mean, that's the... we have to understand that while there are some anti-DC elements in the Trump cabinet, and a lot in his base, that very quickly, based on the history of all previous administrations, the Donald Trump administration will form its own establishment and enter into a power-sharing relationship with the existing powers in DC, and no system of authority likes those who undermine its authority, undermine its public presentation of having competence and authority before the public, and that's what whistleblowers do.
Okay. And Baggleby asks, is there anything that can be done to get the UK government to act on the UN ruling of illegal detainment?
So this refers to the February ruling in the UN that I am illegally detained and should be immediately released, and the reaffirmation of that ruling on the 29th of November, I believe. Yes, the reaffirmation of that ruling, where the UK appealed and lost. Well, it's a matter of, there's a diplomatic cost for the UK and Sweden continuing to behave that way. Interestingly, the chair of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the 5 jurists who oversee these cases where they're litigated before them, stated that the UK and the United States had sought to apply influence and pressure behind the scenes, outside of the formal legal process, to the members of that judicial panel. His name is Professor Mads Dennis. So if you search for him and Assange, you will see that attempt by the US State Department to illicitly apply pressure to the United Nations as it was deciding a case, my case.
Okay, so we are getting towards the very end of the press conference now. Julian, I think everyone would like to say thank you for answering questions today. There are obviously a lot more questions we could have taken, but time has come up on us. So I'd like to thank you all very much, and I would like to thank Julian, and thank you very much for listening.
Just as a final parting remark, once again, WikiLeaks and its publications are entirely funded by our readers, the general public, and our publication sales. So if you want us to publish faster and harder, well, the way to do that is go to wikileaks.org, click on that donate button, and you can fuel up our ability to publish, but also to fight the 12 or so different legal cases we have, defensive and offensive. Tomorrow I will give an Ask Me Anything chat on Reddit, where I'll talk about why it is that many people came to believe that I was dead or missing or kidnapped. Quite interesting story. Not just an organic phenomenon, but people placing deliberately falsified reports to say that I was dead, and therefore WikiLeaks could not be trusted and no one should give us leaks or information.
Okay, thank you very much, Julian.